This is SelfWork, and I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. At SelfWork, we discuss psychological and emotional issues and what you can do about them, whether that's learning self-acceptance, taking action, or seeking therapy or treatment. 8 years ago, I extended the walls of my practice to reach those of you who might already be knowledgeable about mental health treatment, but also to those of you who might say you'd never darken the door of a therapist. And yet, you are here. I'll answer your questions while I invite you to take a few minutes for your own self-work.
But it's interesting, too, how, a lot of parents have read the book, and it just stimulated their thinking of how they can re-engage with an estranged child, or just maybe into a subject that is not something they typically would do, and maybe do it in a more open, less threatening manner.
Welcome to this week's edition of SelfWork. I've featured some guests who in their books or teachings enter a spiritual realm. But what caught my eye about this author and this book, Ken Guidroz, and his book Letters to My Son in Prison, was that both believers and non-believers in traditional faith were writing very meaningful reviews of it. Here are two of them, one from Kathy Bird, author of The Boy Who Knew Too Much. A gripping true story from beginning to end. It is intelligent, humorous at times, and overflowing with spiritual insights. One of the most thought-provoking books I've ever encountered. And here's the second. I'm not a believer and I'm not a father. So why do I like Guidroz's book so much? Because Letters to My Son in Prison makes the grade as literature worthy of reading in depth. It's raw, straight from the heart. Ken has laid his heart and soul on the table and done it with unflinching courage. That's by David Booth, co-author of Own the Room. Ken is a husband and partner, father of 3 sons and a grandfather. He's a man a little over 60, an ex-pastor, and a retirement plan manager. I loved this book. It's written in a very forthright way, no holes barred. Ken talks about being a dad to 3 sons. All were somewhere on the spectrum of having issues with drugs. But his middle son, Lucas, he was an addict. And he accidentally killed someone while driving his car, and he ran from the scene. Ken questions himself, how he'd raised the boys, decisions he and his wife had made, what role the church played in the problems his family had, and in the solutions. He takes the reader through the 3 years his son served in prison. Not all the letters they wrote are published, but you can see and hear the beginning of forgiveness, grief, responsibility, humility. I sat down on Sunday about 11 o'clock and 4 hours later got up. This book was riveting. And because we had over 100,000 deaths in 2021 from drug overdoses, it's a book we all need to read. Before we hear from Ken, let's hear from BetterHelp. BetterHelp has long been a sponsor of SelfWork, and a great one. And of the several online therapies out there, they by far have the most highly rated. In fact, I looked it up to make sure. And Forbes has BetterHelp rated more highly over both Talkspace and Online Therapy, the other major online providers. Now, you might be asking yourself, so why would any good clinician want to work for an online service? Let me tell you, those clinicians don't have to take care of all the business details, the paperwork, the insurance filing, the scheduling service. None of it. I myself have been approached by BetterHelp several times to join their network. And when I saw the benefits, frankly, if I hadn't already had too much on my plate, I would have joined. You can communicate through text, chat, video, or phone, whatever is most convenient and works for you. And the number one problem that so many people face when considering therapy, that problem is taken care of for you. What is it? How do I find someone? The BetterHelp website asks you questions, you answer them, and then they find a therapist that fits best for you in your area. If you have one session and don't get much out of it, all you have to do is let them know and the process starts over again. It's private, professional, convenient, and affordable. These are licensed professionals, someone who's put years into their training so that they can best help you. And so much of the hassle is taken care of for you. They now have 35,000 clinicians in their network, up from 25,000. So now is your time to choose BetterHelp. And if you use this link, betterhelp.com/selfwork, you'll get 10% off your first month of sessions. It's betterhelp.com/selfwork. I promise you, good therapy helps. I know. I've been there. It helped me, and it can help you. And now I introduce you to Ken Guidroz. Ken, what I was so struck by about your book, which, by the way, I sat down at 11 o'clock Sunday, and I got up at 3:30, and I read your whole book on Sunday, beginning to end. And
Really?
I was mesmerized. Yes. And I read a lot of books. And so I was so struck by the fact that, of the reviews, there were people who were believers and got something out of your book so rich and so meaningful to them. Then there were other people leaving reviews that said, I'm not a believer. I'm not particularly interested in, or this isn't important to me in my life. But the book was so raw and you were just right there. That's what I felt. I was right there with you as you were writing those letters. I mean, that's how you just pulled us in. Now, I know the letters were to Lucas. They weren't for, you never probably envisioned at the time that hundreds and thousands of people would be reading them. But I'm so delighted to have you on SelfWork, because I think all of your journey, both the one that you questioned yourself as a dad, you certainly learned more than you wanted to know about drug abuse, and then you had to handle your son's accidentally murdering someone, and your other sons having drug. I mean, the book is just replete with, discoveries and transitions for you. So I cannot wait for SelfWork listeners and me to hear more from you personally.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That really does mean a lot. It is a strong cup of coffee. It's a strong cup of coffee, but sometimes strong coffee can be a beautiful thing. If it's cold enough and you're in the snow, right? And you're at a ski resort, right? That strong coffee can be beautiful, but it means a lot, especially that you read a lot. And I'm just delighted that it touched you. Just delighted.
It did. And I had read a little bit of it, and that's when I decided, oh yeah, we want to have him on the show. And then, like I said, I literally did not get up. My husband goes, what are you doing?
That's awesome.
And the other thing that was different for me in reading your book, what I usually do is I sit and I underline things and I write down notes. And I found myself not wanting to do that with your book, because I didn't want to pull my attention away from what you were saying and how you were changing and what you were realizing. And so I just want to talk to you.
Let's do it. Okay, let's just talk. We're talking right now. Yes, this is great.
Okay. So first, tell SelfWork listeners a little bit about the basis of the storyline, for lack of a better word.
So I guess the seminal moment is when my son did accidentally kill a man. My son was high on heroin. He had been struggling with opioids for over 10 years, and he got off of work, excused for the quote flu, but he was actually high, drove down a country road, rear-ended a man who was riding his bicycle, and tragically
Rod,
and killed him. Just killed him before he hit the ground. He was dead, and made a widow and killed a man. So yeah, that certainly was the moment. And so I write about what led to that, the challenges we had as a family, me as a dad, them as sons, as young men growing up. And then what happened after that? How did I get over my anger at first, which then morphed into concern and moments with him that showed me that maybe, just maybe, there would be some redemption in this. something may come of this. So yeah, that's really the book in a nutshell.
And a lot more. I mean, your choice to reveal some of the mistakes you believe you made, and I hesitate to call them mistakes. There were choices that ended having an impact on your family that was not, you didn't see it coming.
Yes.
Like going back into the ministry, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the letter writing a little bit. So your son is in prison, and help us understand the reason why you began writing.
Let me first comment on what you said, that you said some of the mistakes or things you might have done differently. I liked how you worded that, because, what are parental mistakes? Right?
Yes.
It's like you're just doing the best you can. You're responding. And certainly, especially around some moments when I was a pastor, I was feeling pressure from the congregation and from above, and then pressure from my sons. I clearly made some ill-advised, wrong decision, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But, that whole road of parental angst and revisiting your decisions, that's a slippery slope. That's challenging. I'm delighted that you worded it like you did, because yes, in hindsight, I see things, but as you're going through it, you're doing the best that you can. And certainly my wife, Joyce, and I, we did the best we could.
Oh, she did.
And I'm very transparent about moments when I didn't do very well. So I think that's important as a parent. We can't feel like just because I was doing the best I could, that was, the best thing. No, sometimes you're just a jerk and you're not a good parent.
Exactly. And sometimes
okay,
you don't do
fair enough.
Yeah. And I love your point about, you pull a young man from the wreckage of a car and you think you saved his life, and then he turns out to be paralyzed. And so you think, did I do the right thing? I mean, he can't move his body from the neck down. And so you never know the outcome of what's going to happen when even you have the best intentions in mind.
So to your question about the letters, they were a desperate attempt to make a connection, right? Mm-hmm. Because think about it, abuse of substances hamstrings a relationship. It turns it into this, from real to unreal, from real to absolutely unreal. They're just not real people. When you're using, you're not yourself. You're not a normal person. And so Lucas and I had drifted dramatically. My first attempt was a flail, a release of emotion that I thought, because we both loved the show Dexter, might be this cool father-son connection. Wrong. Bad idea. Just didn't, their heart was there and the execution was terrible. But that aside, I continued. I wrote him. I wrote him a letter outlining. He had called me from prison and mentioned that a guy in there named Preacher Man had mentioned that David from the Bible too had killed a man in cold blood. And Lucas was intrigued by the whole Bathsheba story, and I thought, as a spiritual man, I thought, well, this could be a cool connection. So I wrote as if it were a novel. I wrote the Bathsheba David story as if it were a novel.
It was incredible.
And it wasn't erotic, but it was, this side of it. It was real. Come on. Yeah. He slept with her. He longed for her. Right? The story is salacious in and of itself, beyond the sexual part, but the scheming and all the elements.
All of it.
Beautiful story to me. And then, it was an effort for me to say, Lucas, look at this. He appreciated.
You're not alone. You're not.
Yeah, you're not. Exactly. You and the person of the Bible that the Bible calls a man after God's own heart. You and that guy have something in common. Mm-hmm. Are you kidding me? To Lucas, it was one of the most redemptive, hopeful things in his entire incarceration. Mm-hmm. Was getting that letter and realizing he had something in common with someone like David.
There's a chapter in your book. It's an early chapter. It's called Special Torture. And I mean, I won't read this whole thing, but you're talking about what it's like to see your child develop an opioid addiction, and you say, it's a special kind of torture to watch your child slip away from you into the arms of heroin. It happens slowly, unremittingly, in fits and starts right before your eyes. As the look in your eyes grows frantic, the look in theirs dulls. The light disappears slowly, mercilessly, until there's no fire, no spirit, no electricity, only a muted gaze, because only one thing matters now, which of course is the drug. This is exactly what that chapter is talking about. You watch your child disappear.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the most, and because it's so slow and because it's before you, whether they live with you or not, you still see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's, that's the torture part, right? Because you just long for what you used to have, and the odd thing. And Margaret, you read the book. You know how much homage I pay to the deceased man, and to his wife, Valerie.
And to his wife, yes.
But having said that, it pains me to think that if this hadn't happened, my son Lucas, instead of being married, working hard, loving the heck out of me, just as a son, just the cutest son, a little toe-headed kid, 1.5-year-old running around my house yesterday, instead of that, I think I'd still be dealing with that look in his eyes, that blank look. And I do feel for parents who have decades of that, and maybe the rest of their life. And, you do have to reach a point where, you develop that independence and you realize I am not my children. And that whole thing, which I'm sure you deal with all the time. I can't even speak to that.
A very dramatic example of that is a woman who came to see me a couple of times. The last time was maybe the most poignant. Her son had bipolar disorder, and he also was a heroin addict. And at the time I saw her, he was living on the streets in New York. And she said, I love it when he's in jail because I know he's safe.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And she said the only thing that she was equipping him with was a cell phone. So if he needed her, he could call her. And one day they had a brief conversation, and he thought he'd hung up the phone.
Ooh.
And she heard him selling drugs to a child.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, there's something about that moment, but I just gave up. I gave up hope. Now, I haven't seen that woman in a decade probably, but I'll never forget the look in her eyes of continuous hope, continue trying. And then this acknowledgement, incredibly deep, unbearable acknowledgement that not only, but he was acting to have other people or create those kinds of problems for children.
Yeah, no, that's unfathomable. And I'm sure a lot of your work is we're helping people make that separation between whether it's them and a spouse, right? Them and even an addiction, them and their child. There is, I'm 64 now, and you have friends come and go. You have your work. You have all these things. Like even your spouse, like my wife and I. It's 41 years. We're great together. We're doing well. But even in a marriage, it's you.
Sure.
Your spouse is not you. Yes, they're there, but you know what I mean? It's you. At the end of the day, it's just you. And being healthy with yourself is hard. In some ways, writing this book helped me get there. And I still work on it, right? I still work on keeping myself grounded and loving myself, and yet not being in love with myself, right? And that, in some ways, that's the key to life is figuring out how to separate yourself and be what you need to be.
How did writing the book change you? What was that process like for you?
I mean, writing has changed my life. The act of writing, the practice. I call it a practice. You probably do. You have a practice, right? A professional practice, but you probably have other practices.
I practice a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things. I practice writing. And it's changed my life. It has absolutely changed my life. The book brought into focus what happened during 15 very dark years. I looked at my decision to go back in the ministry. I looked at my family. I looked at the decisions I made. I looked at what happened after that and how Joyce and I managed and how we tussled and how we came back to reasonable terms. You know what I mean? You just, and sometimes when you go through it, at least let me talk about me. Sure. For me, it was this gray, foggy memory. It was a memory, remembered a lot, but it was foggy. It was distorted through the lens of hurt. And so it just always had this mystical quality to it that was a little bit weird, and it was what it was, right? And so I start to write. I realize at the end of Lucas's incarceration that he starts to change his life. He starts reading, and I realize, oh my gosh! And you got to realize, Margaret, after so many years of deferred hope and scattered and destroyed dreams, you do stop hoping. You kind of gun shy.
That's why in that woman's eyes, I saw her giving up.
Exactly. And I was there, but then all of a sudden I see my son changing. My oldest had really turned his life around. My youngest hadn't yet, but he eventually did. So as this starts happening, I start thinking, oh my gosh, there's a story here. There's a story that could maybe help others. And it still hadn't developed. And so then I start writing right near the end of his incarceration. Of course, I wrote all the letters, but that wasn't a book, right? That was just me and Lucas. So now I start writing about scenes, and so it was life-changing to do it. It made my past and my life richer. It made me a little bit smarter because I a little wiser, maybe just because I saw some of my mistakes clearer. My sons and I, we play pickleball. So they're all married now. And so we play pickleball every Sunday afternoon. And then we sit in the jacuzzi. So we were doing this as I'm writing, and I would tell them, hey guys, do you remember when I did this? Or do you remember that? And so we're sitting here having these really interesting father-son talks when they're in their 30s, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, sure.
Because now their brain is actually settled in. And so writing, talking, sharing, I don't know, it just enriched my life. And I've continued. I do a weekly essay now. And even just this week, just right before I got on with you, I was working on, my grandson and I had this amazing talk where he says, Opa, it hurts my brain to think about how there was nothing, and then there was something, and now there's everything. And, we've been talking about evolution and the Big Bang and God. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? So that was cool. That was like a couple weeks ago. But then to write about it, it's just different. It adds a layer to your experience of life, at least my life, that now it's denser, it's thicker, it's richer. So yeah, both writing the book and continuing to write has just been one of the great joys of my life, I'd say, over the last 5 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. So to make sure that people who are just listening and have not read your book, what happened was Lucas actually, there was never a trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was sentenced, and then he was sentenced to 10 years. And then he spent 3 of those years in prison, and did incredible things there. Made decisions about reading and about taking courses, and he found out this is the way you get out of here. And but it wasn't just that. It came across that he also had just realized this world of ideas and of writing and of expressing and of learning. And then he also delved into his own spirituality, with a lot of guidance from you, I think, probably. So he got out. I have a couple of questions. You can answer one or both or neither. Has he ever met with Valerie, the widow? I'm curious because I know he wrote her on the anniversary of every anniversary. And two, what would you say to those people whose sons and daughters do not get clean, do not use any kind of experience, whether it's about going to prison or whether it's about whatever it is, they are still addicted.
He did reach out to Valerie, as you said, on the anniversaries. And of course, at the sentencing, he got to verbally talk to her. But yeah, it's tough. She's never responded. Okay. The victim, Rod's sister, wrote us after the sentencing. I forget how we got her address, but somehow we got her address. Joyce, my wife, wrote her. So we made a connection, and she was gracious back to us, which was very, very meaningful to us. That, you almost can't say enough about graciousness. I know that forgiveness, as you had on a recent podcast, is a prickly subject, right? And this wasn't forgiveness, but it was graciousness, which I appreciate. And I try to be gracious with people in my life that offend me. So that was the closest we got to something from Rod and Valerie. And then I wrote her as the book was going to be launched last September, a long letter about the book and about my intentions and about, again, apologizing on behalf of our family. So there's certainly been outreach, but never any comments from her. And, my dream, not a dream, my almost hidden hope, now that I'm telling you, it's not very hidden. I
won't tell anybody.
Yeah, you won't tell anybody. Is that one day, through some serendipity, some moment that me and Lucas and her will meet. I tear up even just thinking about that. But anyway, so that's that. To parents whose sons or daughters don't turn around, my sister's in that situation. Her daughter, went so far that it's really affected her, and my sister was just here this weekend, and it was, it's just hard. That talk's hard. That's hard. I almost hesitate to say much, only because I think when parents are in those positions, anybody like me is almost anathema, almost, the last person you want to hear from.
Yeah.
The good news herald, my son turned. But on the other hand, when I've been through 15 years of darkness, I do have a little, I think I can speak to it, It wasn't 1 year of darkness. You know what I mean? It was a long time of darkness. I just go back to God and how he is with us. We have freedom. As much as he may love us, as much as he may want to control us, he just doesn't, right? You can do what you want to do. I can do what I want to do. So to our kids. And as much as we love them, I guess one thing I would say is this, is be comfortable in your gut to treat them how you want to treat them. You told me that one woman, her son having a cell phone was important to her. Well, doggone it, get him a freaking cell phone. And even if their therapist says don't do it, just do it. If that's in your heart and it is in your gut, you just do it. There was a friend of mine, whose son actually killed himself, and she would do things that others might consider enabling, but that she had to do it. And even though it was a tragic ending, she still believes she did what she could do. And I say to her, amen. Because you cannot violate your heart with your child. That I truly believe. And I say to any of those parents, if your heart tells you X, then freaking you do X.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I
didn't know if you'd agree. So you do agree?
No, I remember distinctly a session years and years ago. a man and his wife came in. She was his second wife, and had been for a number of years. And they had a child, but he had a couple of children from his first marriage. And one of those quote unquote children, who was now in her 20s, literally called him almost every night, Dad, cause she was an alcoholic, a horrible alcoholic. And he would go over and find her on the floor retching, or she had to be taken to the ER several times for alcohol poisoning and all this kind of thing. And she refused to get help. And the stepmom looked at me and said, I'm ready to do tough love. I love this child, but I'm ready to do tough love. And I will never forget this man looking at me and saying, but what if this is the night she kills herself?
Yeah.
And then they turned around again and looked at me like I had the answer.
Yeah.
And I looked at them and said, you have to find your own way through this.
Amen.
I don't have the answer for you. I would never dare to say yay or nay or good idea, bad idea, if this is, and what I learned later was that he finally reached his own limit and told the daughter he'd reached his limit and he wasn't going to come to her rescue. Now, again, this kind of has a Disney ending, but sort of after years and years of horrific things, she got sober. And now whether that was a direct result of her father doing that, I don't know.
Right.
She was ready. And I so often remember the look in that man's eyes. And I will never forget it.
Yeah. And I think, to me, at least, the broader lesson is the value of your gut, the value of your own intuition. And this is true, I think, in marriage. It's true in parenting. I even think it's true with God, that you know what you believe. Your DNA is such that, you can live with certain things and you can not live with certain things. And it's important to learn to quiet the voices. Like in the parenting, when I did make some mistakes, I was listening to my higher ups in the church and to the other parents of teens, and letting them distort what I knew I should do in my heart, my own intuition. And I leaned into their wisdom instead of my own, and I hurt myself. Listening to my own intuition with my wife, seeing when things are a little bit off, seeing when I probably shouldn't go camping by myself with my dog, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that it's on the level, because any relationship goes up and down. And even with God, and I was in a church that was unhealthy and I knew it, and I knew I should do some things. Yes, I tried to make some changes from the inside, and I don't regret those. But still, I learned in that church to silence my own intuition, and what I would now call the Spirit speaking to me. I silenced that, and I leaned more into people and less into that. And I think it hurt me. So for the rest of my life, however much time I have, right, I'm on a mission to really learn to both hear the Spirit of God and to learn my own intuition and to go with that.
What kind of feedback have you received? I mean, I'm sure you've been interviewed a whole lot. Has there been any surprising feedback that you've received, or anything like that?
Surprisingly, no.
Oh, okay.
I thought there would be a backlash, because you're right. My book has a lot of spiritual stuff, but it actually is it's not unchristian, but it's definitely not Christian.
No.
I haven't gotten hardly any support from the Christian community.
No, I'm sure.
And I didn't expect it, because I thought they would begrudge my own journey. I think from the spiritually or the church disaffected, yes, they've responded. In other words, people for whom church has not been the be all end all.
Right.
And who have had to find their way with themselves or with God or whatever.
Right.
They've enjoyed it. And I have had some, I did 2 Christian podcasts recently. They're not like super Christian, not syrupy Christian, more like real,
Yeah.
what I would call real Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And they dug it. They were just like all over it. But yeah, so I haven't, I thought some people might begrudge the victim or, me writing a book about somebody who died, and I just,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but that, that hasn't been, that not even a comment on the internet or
That's
Amazon.
amazing. That's amazing.
I know. Not one.
Yeah.
I read almost all my reviews and it was over 100. I mean, yeah, some people go, well, I'm not religious and I didn't like when he did this. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
But I'm one man with one man's faith. It's like, well, I'm just telling you my journey. And, but hey, that's not negative to me. That's kind of like, I almost like reading that.
Yeah. Exactly. I'll never forget. And my dad, I was reared as a Presbyterian, and my dad was an elder in the church and very well respected and everything. But I was probably in my 30s, so he would have been in his 60s. And I sat by him one day in church, and we were reciting the Apostles' Creed. And my dad used to rock back and forth when he would sing or when he would do that. He was rocking back and forth, and I thought, what is going on? And I was listening very carefully, and we got in the car after the service, and I said, Dad, you didn't say all the Apostles' Creed. You left out a bunch of creed. And he goes, I only say what I believe.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh.
I like him already. I dig that.
Okie dokie. Well, that opens a few doors for me.
But it's interesting too, how, a lot of parents have read the book and it just stimulated their thinking of how they can re-engage with an estranged child or just maybe into a subject that is not something they typically would do, and maybe do it in a more open, less threatening manner. Obviously, letter writing has its own de-threatening element, right? Because it's paper, and they're reading it in the comfort of wherever they are. And one of my friends, started writing his son. He had a 40-year-old son, and they weren't estranged, but they just, there were certain subjects off limits. And yet if he opens up my friend about his own life,
right,
in that area, come on, you can do that. You can share what you're feeling or the journey you're going through or the doubts you have about God or whatever. Yeah. Right. It's amazing how disarming it can be to our own kids when we, I have wonderful relationships with all 3 of them, and the depth of our conversations.
Yeah. Well, it's inspiring in many ways. And, I thank you for writing it. I thank you for writing it. And I hope, there was nothing, and then there was something, and then now there's everything. I love that. No telling what's going to happen in that little mind and heart.
Oh my gosh. Kids say the darndest things. Of course, we've heard that 1,000 times, but yeah, it's, just awesome. Just awesome. And you're very welcome. I'm just delighted I read it. I wrote it. I'm delighted that you read it as you did. I mean, not everyone does it that thoroughly, and it is an immersion project, but I don't know. I think seeing one man change or one woman, just seeing another person go through transformation can elevate you and can give you ideas and can, I don't know, just open parts of your brain that may not have been open. I've been on podcasts now. The book's been out about 6 months. And so even articulating the message has honed the message. So talking, writing, hearing, questions, you know what I mean? All that stuff works together, I think, to bring us to our true self, to find out what is my intuition? What can I live with? How can I position my life relative to my son, relative to my spouse? And I think people like you are, and you in particular, are vital in that process. Trust me, if I hit a roadblock, I'm calling you, Margaret. You and I are having sessions. We're having sessions.
Good. I would be very honored by that. Thank you so much, Ken.
Absolutely.
That interview was really incredible for me. He talks just like he writes. And I'm so glad to be able to bring it to you, SelfWork listeners. I promise, I told you 2 weeks ago, I was going to do an episode on highly sensitive people, and I'm going to. It's taken me longer to amass the information that I really want to give you. It's kind of a complex subject, but I promise next week it's going to be here. Thanks a lot for your patience. As always, my gratitude to you for being a part of SelfWork. You can always pick up my book, Perfectly Hidden Depression, in ebook, audiobook, or paperback, anywhere you buy books. Please take care of yourself, your family, and your community. I'm Dr. Margaret, and this has been SelfWork.